Hey y'all, it's me Sydney and welcome back to Planet Sid. So today I wanted to make a video about Mount Everest. I'm really excited about this video because it's been on my mind and on my heart for a while. So if you guys are interested in exploring the phenomenon that is the industry of climbing Mount Everest, then yeah, stay tuned and let's get into it. So it was a quiet morning in the Himalayas on May 29, 1953 at 11:30 a.m., but little did we know history was being made. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay would be the first people to reach the highest point on Earth, the top of Mount Everest. And I don't even think that they could have imagined what the industry of climbing and mountaineering would turn into, especially in relation to Mount Everest. So first I want to explore the business of Mount Everest because that's kind of the main focal point of this video. So first off, I don't even understand why people climb Mount Everest. It's the highest point above sea level on Earth. And I get the sentiment, literally wanting to be at the highest point on Earth. But there's nothing appealing to me personally. And in my opinion, I feel like it's kind of like a little bit of ego. Because why would you need to climb to the tallest point on Earth? And I get the sentiment, but there's nothing appealing about climbing Mount Everest to me personally. I do understand that mountaineering and climbing is a sport, so people do just find satisfaction in that. But they do it just to say that they did it, but don't really care about the community that's being exploited, the risks, or the environment. But I digress for now. But I did do some research on the sport, and most people who are into climbing and mountaineering would describe themselves as adrenaline junkies, and they love the thrill of the high stakes and doing the impossible because it is close to impossible to climb Mount Everest. And the stakes are so high that there are many people who attempt to climb Mount Everest but literally don't make it, if you know what I'm saying. Like, they go up there but they don't come down. And with that knowledge alone, personally, that will be enough to deter me from wanting to embark on that journey, but to each their own. So when Mount Everest was successfully climbed for the first time in 1953, that feat intrigued other mountaineers, and a few decades later, the business of summiting Mount Everest began. The only governments that have access to Mount Everest are Nepal and Tibet, so for a long time, they put a limit of one person per season. And eventually they would allow more people, and then by the 90s, the business was booming. And there is no cap on the permits now, which cost around on average $11,000 each. And this can be attributed to the success of the New York Times bestseller Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. I think that's how you say the name. And this was the personal account of the 1996 Mount Everest disaster, which was when a group was climbing Mount Everest, but then a storm came and it left multiple people stranded, and it ended up unaliving 8 climbers. And for some reason, this book incentivized more people to summit Mount Everest. And in an article for The Hustle, editor Zachary Crockett says that, quote, from 1953 to 1999, there were 1,159 total summits. In the 20 years since, though, there have been 8,986, according to the Himalayan database logs, end quote. And there's a graph as well. I'm just going to put on the screen that I got from the article, just so you can see the gradual climb, no pun intended. On average, 600 people summit Mount Everest every year, but where there is commercialization, there is exploitation. And usually it's Westerners and wealthy people, surprise, surprise, because they can afford to spend over $100,000 per person to climb it. But on the other side, the Nepali economy is dependent on the commercialization of Mount Everest. If you don't know, Nepal is one of the poorest countries in the world, and for a brief period every year, they are able to generate jobs and millions of dollars due to this exploitation. And there are so many different pieces that make up the puzzle of climbing Mount Everest. So yeah, but first you have to take a flight from Nepal's capital, Kathmandu, and Lukla. And after that, there is a lot of waiting. You get guides and you're in a group with other climbers, but you're waiting for the right weather conditions to get from one camp to the next until you reach the top. And all in all, it could take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to summit Mount Everest. This isn't no little 2-day trip like you're going to be on that mountain for a minute. And also you have to pay for the Sherpas, equipment, the ceremony, oxygen tanks, travel, lodging, food, cooks, and medical. So it is not cheap. And there are also multiple companies that specialize in climbing Mount Everest that people book through, and most of them are Western companies, but there have been local companies offering the same service at half the price, which has its problems as well, because there is no limit on how many people can climb Mount Everest now, so there is an overcrowding problem. And the overcrowding is so bad to the point that there is a single file line to get to the top, and a delay because people want to take selfies when they get there. And it's getting out of control, to say the least. And there was even a photo that went viral a few years back of the traffic jam on Mount Everest, which is apparently a normal thing now because it's not slowing down of the people who want to visit. But that photo was taken by Nirmal Purja, and he is a Nepali mountaineer, and it really just captures how bad it's gotten and how absurd it is. Like, can you imagine climbing to the top of a mountain, let alone Mount Everest, but there is literally a line of 100 people before you can get to the peak, and you just have to wait. But there is also a problem because besides the pollution that comes with this climb, there are very real health risks as well. Altitude sickness is no joke, and the closer that you get to the top, the more dangerous it gets. And we'll dive deeper into the dangers of climbing Mount Everest soon later in this video, but for most of the dangers, it could be minimized if it just wasn't so commercialized. And what I mean by this is that the only thing that you need to climb Mount Everest is money. That's it. Mountaineering is a sport, and in a perfect world, if you were going to climb Mount Everest, only people who have experienced and trained for years would do so. I went to Colorado a few years back, and I was ready to pass the fuck out on a hike in Colorado Springs because that is how bad and like how drastic like elevation can affect your body if you're not used to it. So personally, I would never climb Mount Everest personally. So I don't understand why people who aren't physically prepared to summit Mount Everest would even try, especially when there's such a high risk. But I don't see the Nepali government putting any restrictions on this climb anytime soon because of how much money they're generating. And there is a lot of money flowing in and around Mount Everest, but the most important people are being paid the least. And I'm referring to the Sherpas, who are basically making everything possible for the climb. There was an editor with McGill's new magazine. His name is Barangir Fukare. I think that's how you say it. He says that, quote, though the term Sherpa has become synonymous with Everest mountain guides, it actually refers to an ethnic group native to the eastern Himalayas. Sherpas have played an indispensable role in making it possible to summit Everest, but rarely receive the recognition they deserve. They're in charge of setting up and taking down the fixed ropes, as well as doing most of the heavy lifting whilst on expedition with clients. The Sherpas continually risk their lives to prepare the mountain for climbers, and though they earn more than the average Nepalese person, they own drastically less than the Western guides, despite having much higher death rates, as reported by National Geographic. So in this article, he says that, quote, a Western guide can expect to earn around $50,000 per season, while the average Sherpa will only make approximately $4,000. So this is $4,000 for the locals and the natives, while the Westerners are making $50,000. That is insane. $4,000 in general for risking your life is absolutely insane, and that's crazy. And what's even crazier is that these locals know the mountain better than anyone else because they live there. But they're being paid less than the Westerners. And this is just like kind of sort of modern day colonialism. But now I want to get into the risks and pollution because that is a whole nother thing when climbing Mount Everest. So now for the risks, of course, there is a huge risk of death when climbing Mount Everest. And whether it be from an avalanche, and elevation, exposure, or exhaustion, it's very normal when a group is climbing Mount Everest for there to be people who don't make it back down. And when that happens, the bodies get left there. And this is the practical solutions because the climbers are aware of the risks, and I'm sure that they sign waivers and stuff. And it's basically impossible to retrieve the bodies anyways. So these climbers end up being immortalized on the mountain. And one of the most notable instances of this is Green Boots. And Green Boots has its own Wikipedia page. So Wikipedia would define this as, quote, the body of an unidentified climber that became a landmark on the main northeast ridge route of Mount Everest. The body has not been officially identified, but is believed to be Tsewang Paljor, an Indian climber who died on Everest in 1996. And the term green boots originated from the green coal-thatched mountaineering boots on his feet. All expeditions from the north side encountered the body curled up in the limestone alcove cave at 8,500 meters, which is 27,900 feet, until it was moved in 2014. So green boots was considered a landmark, but there are plenty of other bodies that are just there. And so far, over 300 people have lost their lives on Mount Everest. So RP to them, RIP to them. But the risk of death is only getting higher due to the traffic jams being caused by overcrowding. And the overcrowding tends to only get more intense and become like a standstill the closer that they get to the top, because when people make it there, again, they want to savor the moment and take pictures and shit and whatnot. So there could be a queue of up to 350 people just waiting in a long line at the top. And this is dangerous because the top of Mount Everest is what's called the quote-unquote death zone. And this is described as, quote, climbers who ascend higher than 26,000 feet on Mount Everest enter the quote-unquote death zone. In this area, oxygen is so limited that the body's cells start to die and judgment becomes impaired. Climbers may also experience heart attack, stroke, or severe altitude sickness, end quote. So when you're up there, you basically only have a few minutes before you really start to feel the effects of being at that elevation and before shit gets bad. And really, like, that really isn't the time to be standing in a single file line if you only have X amount of time before your body starts shutting down. And to be more specific, CNN says that, quote, the summit of Mount Everest has an elevation of 8,848 meters, which is 29,029 feet. And at that level, each breath contains only 1/3 of the oxygen found at sea level. The human body is also rapidly deteriorating at that altitude, meaning most people can only spend a matter of minutes at the top without extra oxygen supplies before it becomes intolerable. End quote. And also, this is now becoming an even bigger issue due to global warming. So the snow is rapidly melting, and so now these bodies that were up there covered in snow and, you know, just kind of just there, but nobody could really see them, or they would just see their boots or like a part of them, they're becoming exposed because, you know, everything's melting. And it even got to a point to where the bodies would become exposed and they would just be seen sliding down the mountain by the other climbers. So that's kind of morbid, and that sounds like a horror story. But now I want to talk about the trash problem on Mount Everest, because it is also getting out of control. And we all know that when a person climbs Mount Everest, it isn't just a one-day thing. Again, it can take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. So basically how it works is they climb a little bit and then they stop at different resting stations / camps along the way, and then they climb a little bit more until they get to the top, and then they have to do the same thing on the way back down, and the whole trip takes weeks. And this is important because you're basically are living on a mountain for a month and you're producing waste, which is unavoidable. And so this includes food waste, oxygen tanks, fecal matter, and miscellaneous trash. And so it can be challenging to adequately clean up after the Sherpas and the climbers due to it being so dangerous. So a lot of times, even though they do their best to clean up and there are other things in place, a lot of time trash still gets left there most of the time. And the National Geographic says that, quote, each of those climbers spends weeks on the mountain, adjusting to the altitude at a series of camps before advancing to the summit. During that time, each person generates on average around 8 kilograms, which is 18 pounds of trash. And the majority of this waste gets left on the mountain. The slopes are littered with discarded empty oxygen canisters, abandoned tents, food containers, and even human feces. At base camp, there are tented toilets with large collection barrels that can be carried away and emptied, but that is where the toilet facilities end. For the rest of their expeditions, climbers have to relieve themselves on the mountain. No one knows exactly how much waste is on the mountain, but it is in the tons. Again, it's in the tons. Litter is spilling out of the glaciers and camps are overflowing with piles of human waste. Climate change is causing snow and ice to melt, exposing even more garbage that has been covered for decades. All that waste is trashing the natural environment, and it poses a serious health risk to everyone who lives in the Everest watershed. The Sagarmatha National Park watershed is an important water source for thousands of people living in communities surrounding Mount Everest, and the watershed includes the land that directs rainfall and snow melt from the mountains into the streams and rivers. There are no waste management or sanitation facilities in the area, so garbage and sewage are emptied into the big pits just outside the local villages, where they wash into waterways during the monsoon season, and the local watershed has become contaminated, which could be incredibly dangerous to the health of the local people. Water contaminated with fecal matter is known to cause the spread of deadly waterborne diseases such as cholera and hepatitis A. End quote. So yeah, it's pretty much a domino effect that can't really be completely stopped because people will always climb Mount Everest, and I don't see them putting a stop on that now. But there could be a better effort to control this problem that could start with putting a limit on how many people can climb per season. But one thing that I did see is that there is an organization that is still active, I believe, that is called Clean Everest. And that was created in 2016. And this is basically like an annual cleanup event that has so far collected over 10 tons of trash. I can't even imagine that much trash, but that is a huge start. So at least they are doing something to address that problem. So yeah, I want to dive deeper into climate change. High traffic diminishes natural resources even without the pollution, and there aren't supposed to be hundreds of people trekking along a mountain. That disrupts the natural environment and adds strain to an already dwindling ecosystem. And the National Geographic reports that the glacier at the top of the mountain has lost over 2,000 years of ice in less than 30 years, and this is due to global warming. And it's only getting worse due to extreme and unpredictable weather from climate change, and more deaths are being reported. And the government of Nepal is planning on relocating the base camp to a lower elevation because the current camp is literally melting away. So yikes. And this isn't specific to Mount Everest. Climate change and human greed negatively affect all of nature, not just there. So what can we do? Because I don't want to just rant about rich people doing rich people stuff, because climbing Mount Everest is very much a rich man's activity. So yeah, I don't want to just sit here and complain when there are actions I can be taking too, because climate change affects all of nature, not just Mount Everest again. So first off, if you plan on climbing Mount Everest and you happen to be watching this video, don't. You're spending a lot of money, so you can use that money to pay for somebody's college tuition or buy yourself a Birkin or something. Like, do something else with that money. But on a smaller, more serious scale, if you do visit a national park, you can book ahead and you can clean up after yourself. And also try going in smaller groups or alone if you're bold like that. Because national parks have been dealing with overcrowding since the pandemic as well. Another thing that you can do is just to visit your local attractions and scope the scenery out. And there's joy in just looking at things and admiring the beauty. Like, nature is so beautiful, and I do think that it deserves to be admired. And yeah, just admiring beauty in all aspects of life. And just because you see something or someone beautiful doesn't mean that you have the right to conquer that thing. This goes for people and Mount Everest and nature. And for me personally, Hawaii just seems like a dream. Like, I can only imagine how beautiful it really is. I've never been, but I wouldn't feel comfortable going there knowing that the natives have been begging for the rest of the world not to visit due to the over-tourism. So yeah. So like, we deserve to escape and to experience beautiful things, but at what cost? But until then, I'll just admire the beautiful greenery where I live. Wherever you live, I'm sure there's something beautiful, even if you're just looking at the trees. Everything in nature is just so amazing, and it's so beautiful. And it's just such an expression of beauty. And there's beauty everywhere. You just have to look for it. And also, your body isn't built to be on the highest point on earth, so just don't do that to yourself. I don't get it. I don't know what other mountains you can climb. I don't know. Is the Appalachian Trail considered a mountain? I wouldn't do that either though, because I mean, that sounds fun. Like, I do enjoy exercise, but wasn't it like that It's like a serial killer or something. I don't know. Just walk around a park or something, or just go outside, or just go on a nice scenic drive instead of getting on the highway. Take the scenic route, or don't. I don't know, but if you happen to be watching this video and if you plan on climbing Mount Everest, if you got that kind of money on you, don't like use that money for something else. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Don't climb Mount Everest again, and look all around you, look outside, or just go on Google. You'll be able to find some cool parks or attractions that you didn't even know were near you, or maybe in the next town over, wherever you are. So yeah, that's that on that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really enjoyed making this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. I feel like this is an odd topic, but I've been thinking about it. I've been marinating on it for so long, so I just wanted to make a video. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys feel safe and seen wherever you are, and I hope you guys are finding joy and fulfillment on your journey of self-expression. Until next time.